Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Final Trade. So let's have episode three of the most ridiculous and stupid and sad and disappointing and hilarious stories of my engineering career in the corporate world. And this one has to do with Company B, the insane shit show of a company that I worked for about 7 years in the 2010s. And really the culture of that company was so terrible. It was so poorly run, and it's as if the company not only misaligned all the incentives to make everyone act as badly as possible, but then the company would actively defect against you all the time. You'd be sitting there playing your prisoner's dilemma, so to speak, and you'd be hitting cooperate because you're literally getting a paycheck every week to hit the cooperate button. And the company would just sit there and mash the defect button just to mess everything up. And so this particular story of it is from about 2015 or so. And I worked in a group at the company and we created, let's say it was a big product and it sold for about $15 million. And the group that I was in had been making this product for about 20 years at that point. We were very good at it. And this particular version of it that we sold to a particular customer, we were the only people who had sold that product to that customer in almost 15 years. We were basically the sole supplier because we were so good at making it. We knew exactly what we were doing. And so it came time for the customer to order some more of the thing. And we put in our bid. And we were a little surprised that they didn't just give us a sole source contract. Most of the time, they would do the request for proposal as a sole source because they knew we had the history of success. We could do it cheaper and better than anyone else. And it's just hands down not a real big deal. It was not feasible for anyone else to compete with us. But this time, someone new had gained some power in the company. And so we would potentially go after we had submitted a bid for this contract. What would have happened is we would have uh, been awarded the contract, began buying parts to build the products, and we would have needed some support from what we called logistics. And so, what logistics meant in the context of this aircraft manufacturer and the product we were building was that they would be people who would be in charge of coordinating with our sub suppliers to make sure all the parts that we needed in order to put this thing together and deliver it to the customer on time were moving along correctly, that all the long lead items were getting ordered, that their sub suppliers were ordering things and their sub suppliers were ordering raw materials and that things were moving through and all that stuff was happening. And so, someone outside of our group who had control over the logistics function at the company, he got word that, hey, there's this contract bid happening, and he had the political power to insert himself into the contract bid that we were doing. Now, keep in mind, we had been building this product successfully for almost 20 years and as the sole source nearly the whole time. And what I mean is that most of the time we had not even had to compete because we were so good at it that the customer knew no one was going to beat us. So he comes in and basically his only intent was to build a little fiefdom within the company. So he didn't really care if we won this contract or not. He didn't care if the customer bought the product from us because it was the best product. He didn't care about any of that. All he cared about was how can he increase his fiefdom inside the company. And so what he does is historically, we had bid about one person half time to do all the logistics work on these contracts. And these contracts might take 3 or 4 years to execute. So you would pay one head half time, so about 1,000 man hours a year over a 4 year contract. And then you multiply that out by the labor rate that we charge the government, and you'd add that on as the logistics cost for the contract. And so what this guy did is he came in and he said, no, 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 no. I've got a fiefdom to build. And so he says he needs 5 people full time working under him. And then he will need to work some percentage of his hours as a manager over the logistics. And so, what we had previously bid and executed many times as a half head, he had increased to over five heads, five people full time plus him part time, in order to accomplish the logistics task. And it just flat didn't need that. I mean, if it had worked out and if we had won the contract with that kind of bid, those people would have just been sitting around doing nothing for years. And these products that we built, they were around $15 million or so, was kind of the cost. And he came in and he summed it up for this multi-year contract and at the labor rate and everything. And his addition onto the contract for logistics, it was something like $6 or $7 million. And so it's like you're going to take this $15 million contract for, a couple of these devices we build, and then you're going to inflate the 15 million price tag by another 6 or 7 million for a task that we've historically performed at 10% of that additional cost. And so my manager who was running the proposal, he tried to harness his own political power within the company. And see, this is what was really dysfunctional about Company B, is it was more about building kingdoms and horse trading and the politics and everything than it was about making money. And so my manager went and he went up his management chain and he explained the problem and he explained that, look, this contract bid is going to go from 15 million to over 20 million if this guy gets to put down this ridiculous number for logistics support, and we will lose the contract. And, it's pretty obvious. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to show the history, to show that we've done these contracts in these price ranges per unit delivered, and that now the unit price is going to jump up 20, 30, 40% for the logistics that this guy is adding on top. And we could show actuals. And what that means is we could show that for the previous contracts, all the times we had done them in the past, here's the actual man hours billed to the contract for logistics support. We could show the actual hours. And we could say, look, you don't need five heads full time and a manager. You need a half head. And so my manager, he really tried. He gave it his all, but he did not have sufficient political power within the company. And so this other manager out there who was trying to build his logistics fiefdom, he was able to successfully insert this onto the contract, increase the bid from, 15 million ballpark up to like 22 million. And obviously we lost. So we lost the contract. So we got 100% of nothing. And it's amazing because you would think that someone at the company would have said, this just isn't going to work out. This isn't going, we're not going to win the contract if we overbid by this amount. And there's no way to justify to the customer that we suddenly need 10 times the man hours for logistics as we ever have in the past. But there was no one in the company who had simultaneously the courage and the political power and the, I guess, selflessness to fix the problem. And so the guy got to put his $6, $7 million logistics bid onto the contract, and we lost it. And so after 20-ish years of being the only people building these things for the customer, and for most of that time, not even having to compete for renewals of the contract, we lost the contract just because of that. Not because we had suddenly just, rested on our laurels and we weren't making good products anymore, or because we had, failed to harness new technologies or anything. It's because the managers at the company just would not tell this person no, because everyone who was in his management chain saw hey, if I'm his manager and he brings in another $6 or $7 million for his logistics fiefdom, well, that falls under my fiefdom and I get bigger. And so that part of the management silo up the company was stronger than the management silo I was in, where my manager was saying, we're going to lose the entire contract. And so that side won with the argument that, hey, we may get $6 or $7 million of logistics work in our management fiefdom. And if not, who cares? We weren't getting anything anyway. And so we got nothing. And that was the kind of dysfunction I dealt with at Company B. It was truly a dreadful, demoralizing place to work, run by absolute ass clowns. Let me know what you think, everyone. Thanks to everyone who makes this content possible, especially my very generous supporters on Patreon. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Final Trade. Just be a human.